So first up, Palantir's explosive 200% rally. Is it just AI hype, or has Palantir cemented itself as an unstoppable force? With deep government contracts, unlimited capital, allegedly, and a long-awaited profitability milestone, we're diving into what's next. Have you been following Palantir at all, Mike, when it comes to the AI game?
I have, and as you know, like in general, I'm more of a value buy investor. I'm interested in companies that are priced below their intrinsic value. So it's hard for me to follow companies like Palantir because they are growth companies. And just from a PE perspective, Palantir is at like 500 times price to earnings. It's extremely overvalued from a lot of perspectives. But if we're just looking at the fundamental growth of their earnings and their projected earnings into the future, there's a lot of positive things to be said about the company. As I made my way through kind of the fundamentals on this one, I was extremely impressed with the turnaround just in the last couple of years. They paid off an enormous debt to equity ratio. They're essentially debt free now. Earnings have been growing crazy. Free cash flow has been growing as well. And these contracts that they've been establishing for a long time now are just growing larger and larger in scope. And they appear to be one of the de facto leaders in using AI for military defense implementations. And I think that that's a really good position for us to be in, of course, as a country, is to have one of the best tech companies in the world in regards to defense technology right here in America. So obviously there's a lot of good things to be said about Palantir, but they are a fast moving growth stock. It's one that's a little more difficult for me to buy into. However, I see the scale of what they can accomplish in the future. I'd be looking to buy pullbacks on this one, I think.
So let's take a look at, but before I give my opinion or to ask you a couple of questions, let's just get our viewers up to speed on a little bit of like what the CEO is alike and what the story is a little bit behind Palantir, because it is pretty interesting. I should mention, just right at the get-go here, that Palantir, the word comes from Lord of the Rings, and it's one of these devices, one of the seven Palantiri. And what's funny about it is that it's like in Lord of the Rings that we know, it's bad, like it's used for the downfall and destruction for a great number of people. So it was made for a good reason and then ended up a bad thing slowly over time. So I find it very interesting that they named their company after that. But that's neither here nor there. Let's see what the CEO Alex Karp has to say about himself.
Major tool for Musk and Ramaswamy's government efficiency agency could be artificial intelligence, and Palantir is already in the game. Anthropic and Palantir announced last month that they're partnering with Amazon Web Services to make Anthropic's Claude models available to U.S. intelligence and defense agencies. The agencies aim to use the large language model to process vast amounts of complex data rapidly and streamline clerical tasks for the government agencies. And when you say streamline, doesn't that mean saving money? That's not the only positive news for Palantir in the past couple of months. The big data tech company joined the S&P 500 on September 23rd and has been on a roaring rally since then, gaining 93%. Joining me now on a Fox Business exclusive is the man leading it all, Palantir CEO Alex Karp. I got to ask you about the stock. It has been such a wild ride. You joined the S&P in September, but even before that, people who understood the business jumped in and said, we believe in it. I mean, that's got to feel really, really good. Almost, I guess, a little bit like the world has woken up to something you already knew. And quite frankly, we already knew because you've been coming for about 3 years.
Well, you seem to know it early. One of the few people who invited me on when I was a pariah, which was about 18 years of our 20-year existence. Yeah, look, you know, things are good at Palantir. We said that, you know, the world is moving to software first, which no one believed. We said the way to build products is the way we did it, which no one believed. We said that you had to go back to what's now called kind of first principles, what an enterprise should do, not what an enterprise thinks it should do. We believed in meritocracy and hiring the best people. We believe America's a great country and our enemies should suffer. And we built products around those ideas. And, you know, there are a lot of people who didn't believe, some who did, and those that did were well rewarded. And we're kind of nose to the grindstone now. We're, you know, very.
Okay, so that's how he talks. That he doesn't actually end the sentences. So we'll just stop it there. So what I find interesting about the company is that you were just saying that before they had this large amount of debt. I was
Mhm.
looking it up. It was something like they were like negative profit for until like 2 years ago.
Right.
They were net negative
2021 is
profit.
when they seem to work their way out of a almost 300% debt to equity ratio, which is incredibly high.
Okay, so I wanted to, so they have so many. I mean, they're like a B2B thing, like the and B2 governments, B2G. So they have these contracts,
Mhm.
these $100 million, multi-$100 million contracts to do these black box type things with the government and these
Targeting of
corporations.
all kinds is what he said. Are you targeting for missiles? He said targeting of all kinds, whatever that means. But they're using AI as part of that as well, which is quite fascinating.
And the CEO, he seems to have this very bombastic, very America first rhetoric,
Mhm.
which is showing up, which he seems to like to go and peddle around, which I find to be very interesting because a bet like that, it's sort of like you've heard me say stuff like, if there's gonna be an event and you can't stop the event, or there's no reason to stop the event, or whatever's gonna happen, you might as well bet on it in order to make money off of it. Because why not? It's sort of like, to me, it's sort of like insurance. You don't want bad things to happen to you, but you certainly don't want, when the thing happens, not to have any skin in the game, not to come out on top. And so to me, it's like I never really felt comfortable invested in any defense contractors or companies that I find to be, where most of what they're doing is dubious. But Palantir, even though they do some dubious things, they're showing pretty interesting use cases
Right.
for the LMs. I just want to show you this quick video from Twitter. I don't know if you've seen it, where it's this hospital that had their entire process learned by an LM within like a Palantir product, and then they basically cloned that hospital.
Right.
Have you seen this?
I haven't. And before you get to that, I do want to point out that that's what's probably the bigger part of what to take away from the Palantir story here is that they're leveraging all this experience they've had from these governmental contracts, which, they work for every three-letter agency in the United States and have built solutions for each and every one of them. But there's all this opportunity for efficiency and all this opportunity for advancement from a technological perspective that touches all kinds of other industries. So if they're moving into healthcare, I think that's important. If they're moving into governmental efficiency, I think that's important. But I'm also seeing that they seem to be moving into other foreign agencies as well. They work for the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. They're looking at European defense as well. And they're already working with like Airbus, BP, Merck, Credit Suisse, and others that should sort of clarify that this story goes well beyond these defense contracts. And I think that's the real opportunity here, is taking this technology to the next place. But maybe we can unpack more of why this is important for AI in general after the video here.
So this is I guess, an ad or something about this hospital that's using a Palantir technology.
Okay.
With Palantir, we created a digital twin of our most complex hospital. The goal was to simplify every variable in moving patients through the hospital and make it seamless. This tool, which is now being used by other healthcare systems, is the first commercially viable AI product co-developed by Cleveland Clinic. Take a look.
Running a hospital is complex. Physicians, nurses, hospitals, outpatient centers, operating rooms. More than 30,000 patient encounters every day. We are trying to orchestrate all of these moving parts, and they all need to go perfectly. Historically, it's done through spreadsheets, Post-its, phone calls, text messages. With Palantir, we were able to pull all of the data into a single place, a virtual command center that will model the entirety of hospital operations. We have 3 modules today.
Hospital 360 has transformed how we're able to place patients in beds. We're able to do it in a quicker, more efficient way. I can see the predicted number of patients coming in for the day by building, and I can see the number of predicted discharges coming out, and I can see the number of patients who are waiting, either in the emergency department or patients having surgery who need beds. It's live in real time. It's learning our data. It's reading the patient's notes and saying that's a potential discharge.
The nurse staffing matrix, you can actually see where you're overstaffed, where you're understaffed. Everybody had a trusted view of the patient census and the nurse allocation. It results in managing nurse assignments efficiently and effectively, and in a way that's more predictable and leads to nurse manager satisfaction. OR utilization, the objective function is how do we maximize the number of patients and procedures that we can do through each one of our operating rooms. We're trying to make a smart system, trying to model the problem properly. That's work in progress.
This is another way we're innovating around patient care. It's all about helping more people.
It's been transformative and just shows you the potential. One could imagine managing from ICUs to step-down units to floors to set the standard for being the best-run hospital in the world. That's the ambition.
All right, so I love this.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love this. The idea that, and this is the promise of the AI that we've been telling us: feed us your information from your post-it notes, your emails, the conversation, feed it in, and the LM will be not just the LM, but the whole AI-based system will be able to then figure out in granular detail where you need to be, what needs to happen to benefit the most number of people. I want this. I want this. Like, you can imagine a system like that down the line that's monitoring everything that you are doing in your own life. And can you imagine competing against somebody else who has that sort of system?
Sure.
Where it's optimizing everything that they're doing, when they're sleeping, when they're eating, how they're talking to other people, all that stuff. Oh my God, to me that's absolutely brilliant. So when I then look at the stock and then I see it parabolic, I go, okay. I mean, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't this be the case? I would expect Google to be up like this. That's not happening.
Sure.
One I'm just curious about, because when we talked about last week about the AI plays, we talked about Meta and Amazon in the context of inference chips versus trading chips,
Mm-hmm.
and how they would be resistant to this whole DeepSeek thing or competition in the AI space from abroad. And Alex Karp from Palantir is saying, "Hey, we already thought about that. We've been thinking about this for 20 years. We're not in the training game. We know that's going to be taken care of. We're in the software play, and this is where the
Correct.
trillions of dollars are going to be made."
That's right. And I think a lot of people have forecasted that for some time now. There have been conversations as early as maybe 6 months after OpenAI even released ChatGPT that pointed to this idea that governing data that no one else has access to is largely one of the competitive advantages that companies are going to have in terms of improving models that they're deploying to their customers. And I think that there's no question that Palantir is an example of having a warehouse of data that no one else really has access to, right? Like OpenAI was trained on the whole of the web, whatever was published publicly, not what is retained in data warehouses by massive corporations around the world. So access to that information gives Palantir an incredible, competitive moat here in terms of what they can do with that information relative to their competitors. And until you establish those types of contracts to access that information and actually model from it, it gives other AI companies that are in the software space a disadvantage in terms of the solutions they can provide. So yeah, I think Palantir is an example of one that has this specialization and access to information that gives them a competitive advantage. This is the software play that I think has been described for some time now.
So that's why these software companies. So this is Palantir.
Yep.
So that video we watched when they were up 93%, that was 2 months ago. They're up another 100%
Right.
since then.
That's right.
I mean, they're just gapping up. So now we're really in this parabolic GameStop level move on the chart, where you're even parabolic on a logarithmic chart. So then you're really exponential on that one.
Sure.
When I take a look at Nvidia, that's still struggling to get out of its dip because of DeepSeek. And then we take a look at the other plays, the Meta, which is also rising pretty dramatically, and then Amazon also rising dramatically based on this cloud play. This software thing, right? The software is eating the world thing. It's something not to be ignored at all. Now, there is one part that makes me like Palantir more than any of these other software plays, and that is if we're getting into a period of let's say the next 4 years with Trump is massive reduction in wasteful spending and removing of regulations and tax cuts and blah blah blah, and focused on GDP growth.
Mhm.
Well, we might not have the 0% interest rate, access to free quote unquote money in the capital markets, but there is another source of free money, which is government money, right? The
Sure.
fiscal side. And if these companies like Palantir who have access to these government contracts, it's not going to end. They're just going to continue. You can expect that to run for years and years, and then it becomes a great addition to their portfolio in order to get other things from other places. So it makes sense to me that they like other contracts from other places. So it makes sense to me that they could run at a loss for years, because the promise of what this data can be turned into is going to be hundreds to billions to trillions of potential dollars of actual productivity. I mean, this to me is like, okay, this is a company where you're looking at Palantir at whatever it is right now. What's the current stock? It's at 110,
Right.
and even though they have a high price PE ratio, it might be cheap.
That's the argument from a growth perspective in general. It's being able to forecast out what you think they're going to be able to produce that goes well beyond current valuations. And that's always been what's tough for me. But I feel like Palantir is an interesting exception to my rule for companies that I typically look at. Yes, you're right. It could feel very expensive today, but you're not comparing this to the maybe $1 trillion of market cap that they could be adding over the next 5 years, depending on how many markets they impact. And that's the tough part. It's very difficult to tell like what they're going to be able to accomplish. That said, Palantir's always been a very fascinating company, starting out in its original days, feeling like it was so black box that they couldn't even mention who their clients were. Nobody really, knew what they built. They couldn't talk about what products they were actually delivering to their customers. So it's really fascinating to see now how much more information we've really learned about them and the applications that are really rolling out to more of the private sector rather than just the defense contracts.
Right. All right. So the trade there would be, I don't know, long Palantir on pullbacks.
That would be my argument. I'd be looking for some pullbacks. Anytime you can get it a little bit cheaper than where it's priced right now, like parabolic moves are really tough to trade. But every day, if you're waiting for pullbacks, you're going to potentially watch it keep skyrocketing in the meantime. So perhaps split your bet,
That's right.
But it's a long one. You could even dollar cost average over the next 12 months or so, taking advantage of every up and down move and still get yourself into a good average position. That said, continue to investigate the company. There's a lot to learn about what they're trying to move into. I think Alex has a lot more of the story to tell now that they've kind of moved into new sectors, and it's definitely one to continue to understand the core business model, because as they move, if the bigger value proposition comes from what they can do in the private sector, then it's going to be really important to try to keep an eye on how the business shifts that direction.
That's right. And any company like that is also supporting the government and their government duties and the things they want to do while using the data of the population, it seems like a no-brainer. Like that's a money printing endeavor right there.
Sure.
All right.